Hi guys, how you guys doing? So, welcome to another coffee with behaviorist. And guess what happened? I spilled my coffee. So, obviously I screwed up with the coffee. So, I'm without coffee. So be patient with me, and I'll get a handle on it at some point. So, our today's discussion is something that I personally am passionate about, and I wanted to share it with you because I struggle. And I was wondering if I'm interested in your input because it's not really only affecting me; it also affects my client. And usually, questions that I have, or people ask me the question, is how is it possible that online training can help you? And the usually answer is, well, because it's different. And I checking with myself, and I was like, what exactly is the difference between online training and online training? You know, I do online training since 2007 full time. I remember my first client was actually a colleague in England who is well known, and I respect the privacy of the situation. The reason why the colleague reached out to me is because of that privacy and the position he had um, in the industry. So it was more of brainstorming and tried to identify underlying causes and triggers. Since then, I think I worked with over 2,500 clients. Um, and the reason why it worked is because of the way it's structured and the way it's assembled as a system. And I know many people struggling this period of time because of the restrictions we have. Most of the training schools are closed. We have problems with socializing. There are so many problems happening at the same time, um, internationally, not only in US or in Europe. And I know from other friends who are psychologists who are saying, and I know from different countries in England and in Germany and in Austria, I don't know the statistics in US, but right now, all the psychological facilities for children are basically full. So there's a big thing going on, and I was kind of lucky to not being needing to jump on the wagon of online training because I was already there when people told me that's not gonna work. It's not working. How can you help a person who struggles with his dog and has aggression issues or separation anxiety or any way of behaviors that you have to physically be there and control the situation? By the way, I'm Roman with Holistic Dog Training, and I was wondering where you're from. Okay, I don't know who this is, but the online training can show people how to do this. But what you can't do is see the timing and mistakes of seeing when a student has conflicting body language. Absolutely, yes, correct. Okay, I agree with that. We're going to talk about that. So in that case, when I set up an online training session, I look into the whole structure of the dog's environment, the environmental factors, health issues, nutrition, and interaction with people and dogs and other pets, the dog's history, adoption history, behavior history. So we create literally a timeline of events as they come in, and they're available. Now, why I'm sharing that and why I'm talking about this, it's not a sales pitch. It's basically me sharing what I'm struggling with, and I would like your feedback. So what I'm struggling with is to find the limit. Where is the limit of, and why is the limit there? And what can I do to change that limit? So I was looking at my statistics. I have all the clients who do online sessions with me send me a short feedback, and I give them an option to evaluate their learning experience. And so from 0 to 5, there is a 4.6, which is, I think, a great feedback considering that they're basically judging themselves and the expectations they had of doing the behavior modification. However, when we get the actual footage on their training sessions, if you can help make corrections in the trainer behavior without hurting their feelings, and this gets tricky, good things starts happening. I agree. So when we look into that, we see that in order to do this, being just a dog trainer is not enough. Just being a behaviorist is not enough, because there is something in between you and your client that you then have physically access to. And I agree with Carol. It is the reality of what is coming through our conversation. So as you sit here next to the screen and you're watching me, what do I see in particular? I see you. I don't really see you, but let's say I see you, and I see you interacting with the dog, and that's all I see. But I need to know more of that. I need to pick up the information that's happening between you and your dog, that emotional transaction that's happening. And once we have that captured and see how that dynamic works as a relationship, it is not something you can read in numbers. You have to kind of tune in and hone in. So you have to be a little bit intuitive in a healthy meaning, that you have to feel into the situation. And I remember I did a session a couple of weeks ago with a person, and in fact, this person is a minister, and we were talking about if the person is in front of the church and has the speech, how does this person get the feedback of his community, how that speech goes? There is an emotional feedback. There is no physical contact. And I was basically kind of like turned into like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that, is that there's a two-way communication happening in a non-physical world. It's just you and me having a conversation. You feel what I'm saying, I feel what you're saying, and all of a sudden it becomes a synchronicity. And I'm using that word exactly, synchronicity. You and me and your dog are in synchronicity, and we can identify what's happening in that moment. However, that is not online training. It is not online behavior modification. But online behavior modification is find the root and the cause of the problem and be proactive rather than reactive. So most trainings are basically reactive. The dog does something, and then we do something, and then the dog's supposed to do something, and then we're supposed to reward the dog. And if we look into those 4 quadrants, we have a positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment, but that is not the way you deliver, the consequences. It's just what is happening in that situation. So in the past, I believe that I need to be 100% seeing what's happening in order to make that call. But I recognize that there is a functional behavior behind any behavior a dog does. If a dog barks at the window, that's what he does. Right now, he's barking at the window. If I try to correct that, I'm missing the point, because there is a reason for the dog barking at the window. And we have to find that reason. And the reason is there because something is missing. And that missing piece we have to find. And it's not something you can do as the dog barks. You have to do it before the dog goes into that. Make sense? So in that case, we have to be very sure that when we do tune in that situation, is we have to feel from a dog's perspective What is the dog struggling with? And we have to admit that the reason why a dog responds is because he has an emotional reaction to it. But that emotional reaction is rooted to an experience. There are breed traits, there are health conditions, there are environmental factors, there are genetics, there are relationships, there is a trauma. All these things make the dog make a choice, right or left, this version or the other version. Even though dogs are binary thinkers and they think either or, and it's hard to make that gray zone, we have to recognize that when the dog is going into that zone and it makes a decision, there is a series of events that are happening. The first one is the dog actually being calm. There's a state of calmness until there is a trigger. And when the trigger happens, there is a processing happening. The dog perceives that trigger, the brain takes that information and distributes it to these nervous channels, and those nervous channels are connected to the heart, and all of a sudden we have a system kicking in kind of pretty quick, right? And the dog responds to that result of those systems kicking in. So how this system works is similar to an engine. Let's kind of make it simple. Let's say you have a car and you start the engine. What do? You get in the car, you put the key on, you turn. No, it's not that. It's you making a decision to get into your car, and then making the decision to sit on the driver's seat, and then sitting on the driver's seat and making a decision to start the engine. And then starting the engine, you have to be in tune with the engine to know when you should leave the key, when certain things happening, right? And when that happens, then you have to let go of that and then let this car start on its own. And so we recognize there's so many factors that are happening at the same time that as an external observer, you see a person in the car sitting and driving, but what's happening inside is what matters. And what happens before that, because that driver had to make a decision if he's drunk or not, if he's capable of driving or not, before he actually sits in the car. So we see there's a thinking process before the event. It's a thinking process that is connected to emotions, and those emotions are being used to make a final decision and make it into action. So we have the idea, we have the decision, and then we have the action. So in classical training, all we do is controlling the decision and manipulating the decision so we don't get the action. But that's kind of too late, because if you're in the car drunk, you're already against the law, right? So what do you need? You need moral and ethical choice. Now, people already freaking out, and I know, guys, sorry for that, but there is very solid evidence the dogs have morals and ethics. They would not be able to function in social settings if they wouldn't have morals and ethics. And then we have that dog have experience. And then we have breed traits. And then we have self-control. And then that means the dog has to have self-awareness. I am in relationship to what? And this is where things get more complicated. And especially if we do just, correcting or rewarding, and we're missing how these things happening, then we only deal with what we see in real time in 3D, like in front of the dog, in front of the person. Now, what online training does, especially my holistic approach, is go before that, where actually the soup is cooking, where somebody put the ingredients in that soup. Okay, before the soup gets hot, before we put it in the pot, before we select the ingredients. You see where I'm coming from? And that's the tricky part. And so when I work with mentors, with mentorships, the first thing I explain is if you want to address a dog's behavior, you need to understand how a behavior happens. How is this the row of decisions coming in, and how the dog has the idea to do something. There is no logic. The logic is very limited. but there is an experience, an empirical things that happen. The dog has one experience through observation or personal experience or genetic information. So we know that genetics can transport information up to 17 generations. And they're not coming one and second and third. It can happen between the first and the 17th generation, that link, without showing up in between. That means that it's not 100% just because of the parents. This is how the dog will be. So we cannot see directly related stuff. We have to literally go out of that and see the potentiality of an event. And I know it sounds like blah, blah, blah thing, but hold on for a second. Look at that. You have a dog who has breed traits. Let's say, for example, a guardian breed. And then we compare it with a hunting dog. We have a guardian breed and we have genetics predispositions. And that dog behaves like a breed of that dog, okay? So the last couple of thousand years, we reinforced that type of behavior traits because we kept particular dogs who had particular breed traits. However, those breed traits only make a small portion of the actual dog's behavior. Like statistically speaking, like scientifically speaking, science is not 100% clear, but I would see more in tune with 42% genetics and 58% environmental factors that affect the dog's actual behavior. Now, how does it tie in with what I do? And what you can do if you want is identifying, making a map, identifying the breed traits, identify the environmental factors around that individual dog, the sentient being that you have to work with, that goes into emotional relationships with his environment, with his other dogs, with pets, with people, and dogs are very special in that. And then find out, how is this recipe look like? And then you can make an assumption, temporary assumption, how would it taste that? And then you start testing it little by little by literally have the client slash the guardian, the dog who owns the dog, to do certain tests, because what you need to test is what the dog actually thinks, beside the breed traits, beside the actions, the individual dog, what is his thinking process? And so I was very torn because I couldn't find it out until by accident I came into a couple of readings of how dogs think, and the dog, they scent with the smell and they observe with their eyes, but basically they have this smell experience. So, and then I came to the conclusion the dogs have to make decisions. And how do they make decisions? And if they have to make decisions, how does it feel like to make that decision? And without basically putting the dog in danger, and of course not putting the person in danger. So I came with the concept that if the dog has an opportunity to make a choice that would be very easy, but suddenly it becomes very complicated, then he has to do certain things. He has to assess the situation. He has to see the trajectory of the potential to find the solution. And if he doesn't have the solution, he should try different versions, other options. And if those fail, what will the dog do next? What are these options? And I wasn't sure how to identify that. So I was looking at the history, and I found out that in a scientific research, they compared wolves with dogs and how their gazing comes in, and how dogs and wolves connecting with people to gather information. And the funny part is that wolves actually don't give a bark or doesn't give a howl about you in a situation he's struggling with, but the dog does. The dog will more likely look at the person over another dog in order to gather information that is of value. So taking that into context, the dog tries to find information from somebody who he believes he knows more than he does, and then he has to assess if that information that he gathers from that particular person is of value. And if that's happening, then that dog should follow through this information because he believes that that will lead to solution that is of benefit of the dog. So you see, there's a kind of complex situation happening here. So we cannot just oversee it. And then there's a big thing. It's the question, who am I in the relationship to this person that I can demand that information and the other person or individual is obligated to give me that information? And then if that person is not satisfied of the way I ask that question, then I have to do something in return. That needs a social consciousness. That needs a social understanding. It's kind of complex. There is an intelligence behind that. And this is where holistic doctrining comes in, seeing that intelligence and see that emotional intelligence behind that dog that we see most people say, it's just a dog. And I had an argument yesterday, actually, in fact, where people were basically arguing that dogs are stupid. Dogs can learn out of 180 words, individual, okay, different words that have different meanings. And I said, based on science, they're similar or very close to a 2.5-year-old child. And those people were nuts. How can you compare a dog with a child? It's not a dog and a child. They are two mammals. Okay, it's a species, two mammals. It's a group of species that have a certain intelligence. We just better. That's fine. But we cannot ignore the fact that a dog has emotional intelligence, and we cannot ignore the fact the dog has a conscious of self, and we cannot ignore the fact that a dog is a social being, and we cannot ignore the fact that the dog wants to have solutions to his problems, because the reason why he's reacting is because he has a problem. And if we ignore that and we only focus on what the dog physically does and how do we manipulate the outcome of that action and not seeing what the dog's emotionally comes from, that emotional road, then we're missing the point. And so if you do online training and if you're not conscious about that, you're going to lose it. You're going to lose the client, you're going to lose the dog. And I would agree with all those other trainers that says, positive training does work, and especially online training does work, because if you not physically correct the dog, if you physically do this and you physically do that, you will not be able to get there. Now here's my question at the first place, all the way back to the history. What happened the first time a first dog met the first person? Who did physically something to whom? We don't know, but we see that a dog will not come in if you physically try to get him. He only comes if he feels safe. If he feels safe, if he feels, because he has feelings. And this is where I'm coming from. When we do online training, all we do, first of all, is being proactive, making the dog feel good. Based on those good feelings, he will be able to make good feeling decisions. And with those good feeling decisions, he will make the environment feel good. And when the environment feels good, the dog feels good. So I don't know if you can capture that. Okay, you can kind of think me through the process. If a dog is calm and confident and feels good, he will make good, confident decisions. And how he gets his good, confident decisions is by how the environment affects him. And in fact, the environment is you and how you put it around him. You wrap your dog's environment around that dog. So holistic online training basically captures that is wrapped around the dog, that affects the dog to feel good and make good decisions. Now, how does it come up with the dog actually has behavior issues? Let's say, for example, the dog is aggressive. I'm dealing with that situation right now, and I'm really puzzled because it's really intense. So the dog escalates. He hears a sound of a truck, and he literally shuts down by the first sign of the truck. How do you modify that? Do you punish him for hearing that sound of the truck that he cannot change? How do you get redirect the dog if that sound is happening and then suddenly that dog goes from 0 to shut down and there's no way to communicate? How do you do that? Especially if you're not there, and especially a person who is not a behaviorist and not a trainer, how do you get that dog to change? You have that person to understand what's happening, giving that person the tools to apply, to build that trust, build the relationship, help the dog trust the person, the dog starts sharing information with that person identifying this information, and then replying to this information, and all of a sudden we have a two-way communication that wasn't there before, and now it has to happen. So, how do you do that? You have to break it down for both parties to the minimum possible denominator, to the smallest possible denominator, so they can process as much as possible in a minimum amount of time. And this is what I feel is successful with holistic online training. Is because there is a system with breaking down those individual informations, building the building blocks, the foundation of that relationship at the very beginning. Who am I in the relationship to my dog? Who is my dog in the relationship with me? What is this relationship worth? What does the dog offer to maintain that relationship? How do I respond to that offering? How do I appreciate that relationship? And all of a sudden it becomes a bigger and bigger and bigger thing. It becomes basically a synchronicity between the dog and the owner that no trainer can do if he's physically there in such a short period of time. Because these two, the person who owns the dog and the dog, the caregiver, I don't like the dog owner, anyway, is how the synchronicity has the solid foundation there, but it's not activated. Because the dog is there in the house and the person loves that dog. There is something going on, and no trainer can take that away from the person and from the dog. So right there, we have that, and we need to capture that. And we need to feed it. We need to make it rise. We need to make it become bigger and stronger and more solid. And then we ask the question, what is your preference? Feeling good, calm, and in a good relationship, or dropping that relationship and do what your body tells you to do? So we ask the dog to apply self-control to his emotions. And how do we get that? If we as people who work with that dog are not being able to control our emotions and hold space for that dog making that decision, and teaching him, when you feel a certain way, what would you do? It's no different than expecting our child, okay, when he goes to a party and he drinks a glass more than he should, and he has to make a decision consciously beyond his body response, right? You know, I just grab my key. I know how to drive a car, right? Oh, you know, I don't need a seatbelt, right? And then go back to that level and says, hold on, I have a responsibility. I have parents. They're looking out for me. I have an obligations. I have a relationship. I need to call them. Hey, Mom, I just wanted to tell you that I just got a little bit drunk. And I don't think I can drive a car. And now is what the child expects, the feedback. How do you respond to that? And that's the key. Our feedback to the dog's emotional response makes that become a glue. And that is what makes the change, because of that glue, of that relationship, consistency, and how you call that, attention, is what helps the dog shift out of it. I shouldn't do that. There are morals and ethical values. There is a family code of conduct that I have to comply with, because I'm going to lose my relationship if I continue doing that. And that's the key. Does it work all the time? No, it doesn't. There's no 100%. You go buy an ice cream and you have to look at the date, making sure it's the frozen date. Then you come home and the ice cream should be still cold, right? You cannot control that 100%. Nothing is 100%. But I saw over the years that if you follow through, be consistent, and do those minimum exercises that I offer people to do, that are very simple, and kind of people are like, really, I have to do those exercises? It reminds me of those Karate Kid, where he was cleaning the car, and it's like, why do I have to clean the car? What does it have to do with karate, right? But it has to do. It has to do with you remembering, and it has with the dog remembering. That memory has to be planted in the dog's body. When the sympathetic nervous system kicks in and the brain is shut off, and the body has to do the thinking, and the body has to have that memory that you want the dog to go through when things hits the fan, when poop hits the fan. I don't want to say the S word, like. And this is what I'm doing, and this is what I would like you to learn. So even if you are a person who has a dog training issue, or you are a trainer who says like, you know what, I want to try this shit. Sorry, this poop. How do you do that? I'm happy to sit down with you and walk you through the process. It's a long thing. For people who only have their own dogs, it takes us about a month, 1 month and a half to go through this transition period. For a trainer who does this professionally and wants, offer service to clients, it takes about 6 months plus, depending on your background and your experience. It doesn't matter to me where you're coming from. I came from, let's say, aversive training, switched into balance training until I kind of left that behind and be 100% force-free. So I'm coming from that journey. I know exactly how you feel, and I totally agree with you. That shouldn't be a problem. But you have to shift mindset. You have to shift consciousness. You have to leave behind your reactivity to a reaction that a dog reacts to another reaction. You have to stop that chain reaction. You have to become in control of how your dog is learning his skills and how the dog makes his decisions, and help him, not taking over, help him make those decisions the way it's safe for your dog, not to your convenience, to the dog's safety, right? And sometimes, people says, well, if my dog doesn't do this, doesn't do that, you need to understand the dog's emotional and physical needs. This hierarchy of needs that have to be fulfilled first, that's the priority, and then your needs. And then you have these emotional needs that kick in, and they have priority over yours. Because if the dog is not happy, you will not be happy. And if your dog is not happy with you, then the whole thing is falling apart. And just because you want the dog doesn't mean the dog has to comply with it. Remember, you guys got into a forced relationship. He didn't choose you unless he showed up in front of your door. It's like, hey, I arrived, I'm here, love me. That's different. But if you go to a shelter, go to a breeder and purchase and acquire a dog, it's not his choice. But then the relationship kicks in and says, even though it wasn't his choice, how do we give him the most possible choices to make that he feels confident, helped and nurtured and cared for, that he can go to his maximal potential and still be safe in our community or environment. The human environment are nuts, okay? I don't know how we actually function here. It's really a miracle. I've been in New York, been in Connecticut, been in Texas, being in Arizona, passed in California, being in Oregon, being in Greece, being in Iraq, being all over the place. People are nuts. And if I would be a dog, I would stay far away from them unless I'm hungry, and then I'm forced to get near them. And those people are crazy, right? How do we make those people feel good? How do we make those dogs feel good and safe? It's possible doing online training. It's possible to help your dog online training. There are very, very few limitations. For example, closing here. If you are handicapped and you, technically speaking, cannot move your hands, most of them can actually move their legs. Most of them can move their face. So still you can work on that. I remember I was working with a person who actually was deaf and was paraplegic. And we still work with her Great Dane, who was basically aggressive, right? And it was the emotional support dog, kind of a tricky, slippery slope there. And so we had to get help. So the person's parent was available. And this person's parent was like 70s. He had a hard time getting the phone. So what we did is we had a third person coming in, which was a translator, who actually translated my conversation into a text language. And that person was able to read that text language and respond accordingly to me in feedback. But there was a gap of time between the translation, the feedback, so it was kind of a slow session. However, we achieved that this person, because his health declined very fast, and we had to rehome the dog who was unsafe to finally keep the dog. It's 1 in a million, but it wasn't possible for a person to go into that house because that dog was so aggressive, that person would not be safe coming in. Yes, of course he would be safe. He would wear a helmet and a bite suit, but the whole thing would escalate to become a trauma to the dog just for that. The person showing up in the zoo because the dog was so guarding the person that the only way to work with that was from inside out instead from outside in. And I know there are all these ideas like, yeah, sure, blah, blah, blah. You just do this and you just do that. It's very easily said. These people went down that road. It didn't work. Not once, multiple times, with multiple trainers. It didn't work. And then they ran out of options. What the option is, right? And I hear all the time, and it's like, yeah, you guys, positive trainers, all the dogs are being put to sleep. I'm not responsible for all these other people who don't understand certain behaviors. And I'm not responsible for those people who didn't find the proper trainer to help them. I'm not responsible for that. I'm responsible for what I'm doing. I am. And my responsibility is to help people who have issues with their dogs understand what's happening. And they should be able to make informed decisions. Not because what I do is what they're capable of doing. Because I can do a lot of things. I can just show up there, do magic, like, ta-da! And then on my way out, that magic goes with me. That's not the point. The point is those people are the dog's parents. And those people are the ones who have the relationship with the dog. And those people is why the dog does this behavior, because of those people, because the dog feels that's the right thing to do. And there's nothing wrong with that. The dog has the right to do these things because he believes it's a good thing to do because that's what keeps him in the family. And if we don't address all those underlying issues, whatever we do will short backfire. No matter how you do this, no matter how you try to correct the behavior, it will pop up in one way or the other. It will be a flare up, not now, not tomorrow, but after tomorrow. Or it will show up somewhere else. You push that in, that pop up. You know those hammer thing where you pop up the heads kind of thing? You pop here, pops over there. It goes somewhere. It has to go somewhere unless you heal it from the source. And that's why holistic dog training is a healing modality. It's not just a training modality. I'm not training a dog. I'm not punishing, rewarding only the dog. I'm healing the dog trauma and healing the pathways the dog doesn't have access to think through a process, to help him making informed, healthy, and calm decisions by understanding his environment and his environmental factors and how he should appropriately react to it. And it wouldn't be possible if I wouldn't believe the dogs are capable of changing no matter how old they are. Do I have failures? Yes, I do. I would be a liar not to have failures. I do have failures. Why? Because for different factors. Some of them are my problems and my mistakes. Some of them are people's mistakes. Some of them are unforeseen conditions. Some of them are medical conditions we do not have access to. And these are the cases I lose. How many there are? I can count over the years, maybe in 5 to 10 hands. which is less than 1% of how many people I work with. So I feel I feel good about what I do, and I feel good leaving behind my past, but not digging it in and not looking at it, because I learned a lot, and it was a experience to understand how things can come up, how trainers can damage a dog, how people can damage a dog. I damaged my dog in the past. I did it, and I was like, how did that happen? How did I make my dog a mess, right? And then I had to fix that. And what's the process? So this is something you can learn. This is something you can literally experience and go through the process and help your dog get out of those issues that he has. So thank you for listening. Thank you for holding space. Thank you for sharing, and looking forward to hear back from you guys.